Well, I wanted to stop and take a look at a topic that I have talked about so much. I have literally done probably more research than most photographers have, and that is the topic of HDR. And I've done so many videos on this from YouTube to all my master classes that I'm almost like at a point where I feel like I'm beating a dead horse into the ground. But the biggest problem that we have today is that the tools that we have keep changing. And so with that, I keep testing my HDR to see if I'm on the right track. So about every 6 months I go through and I'll run my tests. And so I've done these tests hundreds of times. Literally every possible angle that you could do with HDR I've done. I've tried just about every program out there. So I have a sort of a history and a knowledge base on HDR. The other thing that I feel like I have an advantage over a lot of photographers is I came through on the film days dealing with the challenges that we had with getting detail in our highlights, detail in our shadows, with black and white, with the film days and the darkroom and all that. And I spent 10 years literally studying the zone system, Ansel Adams zone system, with densitometers and spot meters. And I mean, I went through the whole thing, read more books on that, every book that you could possibly read on. In the end, I think in some ways, that process was made more complicated than it really was. And with the same thing happens with HDR. You know, there's a lot of very smart people out there and people that approach it from a mathematical, you know, sort of equation, technical perspective. And I've taken a lot of the numbers from some of those really smart techie people and looked at 8-bit versus 14-bit versus 16-bit versus 32-bit, all the numbers and how much more tones and you know, the math that goes with that. And I've got charts on that, and it's kind of behind me now. And I think where I'm at today is that I want the real world results. And so I've done this where I've, like I said, taken an HDR image and then run it through, look at the results from 14-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit. And one of the things that I've discovered is that about 10 years ago, when HDR started coming, maybe even earlier than that, but when Adobe started really building out Photoshop to accommodate HDR, their 32-bit versus their what we would call 16-bit. So if I run it say 3 exposures under normal over through to 16-bit and then run it through to 32-bit, I would see this huge jump in quality difference. 32-bit meaning the more gradients and all that. Then Adobe had some issues where they took the 32-bit away because it was you know, it had a bug in it, and I actually found a workaround the bug. And so I used it for a while, and then it was gone. I was like, what? And a lot of photographers complained, and Adobe brought it back. And it never seems to have been the same. And even like now, when I look at 32-bit, the processing we can do, I go, you know, I don't really see the difference. Now, it could be that the 32 or the 16-bit processing that we see now through Bridge has gotten so much better than in the old days. That could be part of it. And so it's kind of filled the gap. The other thing too is when companies, and this happens across the board, you buy a car and it says it's got 412 horsepower, and then you put it on the dyno and it's only got 350 or something. In the real world, it doesn't have what the specs that, you know, and manufacturers do this all the time. And they push the limits. And even in flash and strobe, you know, I've gone through so many different strobes in my day, you know, 2400 watts, and then you compare it with another company that has a 1200 watt strobe, and the 1200 watt puts out more light. So there's all these terms that we throw around, and then when the real world happens, we go, I don't really see the difference. So with that being said, one of Adobe's little secrets that they've kind of came out a number of years ago is that when you work in a 16-bit environment in Photoshop, it's really only 15-bit, 15-bit plus 1 point something. So it's really 15-bit. Our cameras generally capture 14-bit. It used to be 12, so now it's 14-bit. And some medium format cameras will capture 16-bit. So what does that mean? So if I take a 16-bit medium format camera I paid $50,000 for, drop it into Photoshop, and Photoshop only really works in 15-bit, true 15-bit, am I going to lose some of that quality as I, go into the real world? Big question mark. I don't have a medium format camera, and I've, heard that people swear by the 16-bit as a jaw-dropping, file. When you take a 14-bit and you bring it into a 16-bit environment, which was really a 15-bit environment, you don't gain that extra bit depth. You still have 14 bits of information. But is your camera really putting out 14 bits of information? Big question mark. So every camera manufacturer is going to be a little different at their specs and how they build their chips. Canon builds their chips. I think Sony builds the chips for themselves and for Nikon and other companies. And so when you compare two chips side by side, are you getting the 14-bit, true 14-bit with true 14-bit side by side, or whatever it is? So you can see where I'm going here. It gets kind of complicated, and so then you start to think, well, all right, I want to see what side by side real world comparisons, and then make my decision on that. I'm going to do a side-by-side here, I'm going to show you how to do what we call 16-bit environment HDR, 32-bit environment HDR, which has to be spit out to be 16-bit because that's how it works. My son, who's doing car shoots in LA, I mentioned his Ben, he's diving into, he's very technical, much more than I am. And there are some new programs out there that are supposedly get you true 32-bit, but very complicated, over my head, very time consuming. Maybe something I should explore. I don't know yet. We were just talking about that. So there might be some other programs out there. I've tried, PT GUI will also do a HDR for you. Aurora, I think it is, through Skyloom or whatever it is. I've tried their programs back in the day when there was Nick had some HDR programs I tried. All those tests. I always still kind of came back to Photoshop, and it's easier in a lot of ways. And side-by-side comparisons, I thought, thumbs up. I'll keep working in Photoshop. So there, with that all being said, let's take a look at, this is the shot that I didn't do a stitching on this one. So I think this was my 11-24 lens, and I just did a quick non-stitching during that prime light. So I had this file set up there. And so I don't want to do the stitching yet. We're going to do, I'm going to show you how I do my stitching, merging, and all that. But, so strictly HDR, taking a look. And so this is the image that, and this is a 32-bit one that I did. So let's get out of that for a second. And we're going to go over to Bridge. And let's take a look at, we have, actually what I need to do is I'm going to go in here and we're going to, I gotta clear this out. I gotta go back to the raw. Let's see, so reset to default and then say done. Okay, so these three should be now equal, like they came out of the camera. So let's take a look. Let's do a 14-bit run through. we'll save it, and I'm going to make another folder. Let's make another folder over here. If I can find my, we're going to call this bit depth test 2. So that's where we're going to put everything. All right. So let's go back to Bridge, and we're going to start with 14-bit. All right. So we're going to Command R, which takes me to raw conversion, and I'm going to apply some settings, and then we're going to try to take those settings for the most part and match my 3 different scenarios. So 14-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit. All right. So this is not HDR. This is just if I took one exposure, what does that look like? So we're going to take the highlights down a little bit, not too much. We're going to bring the shadows up. So if I take the shadows over to plus 100, it's not too bad. All right. So I get quite a bit there. I know that when I do my HDR, that's going to be too much. So let's, contrast seems fine. Let's take a look at my white point. So I'm going to click on the slider on the white slider, and I'm going to hold down the option. And then I can slide around and it'll tell me where they start to clip. So I want to go, there's some little lights in the background there. So we'll go plus 35. Same thing with the shadows. We'll go minus 12, okay? Then we'll put a little bit of texture, which is what I normally do. A little bit of clarity, not much. Let's go 10% on both of those. Then dehaze gives me a little bit of contrast, and let's just say around 10% on that too. So that just gives you an idea where I'm at, okay? We're gonna take my color temperature to the left, and instead of 5,300 Kelvin, we're gonna go to 5,000. Let's see, how far can I push that? Now let's go to 4,800 Kelvin, because that takes a little bit of the warmth out of the light, but gives that blue sky. All right, so that is my base. We're going to say open, and then I'm going to save this into that folder, and we're going to save as, and we're going to drop it into bit depth 2, and we're going to call this, let me get my cursor there, 14-bit base. Okay, say okay. So let's go back to Bridge, and now let's do a 16-bit. Grab those 3, the under, normal, over, and we're going to, actually, let me do this just to be safe. I'm going to go back here and clear that out. It might, I don't know if this is true or not, reset, done. I just want to make sure that we don't apply the settings that I did in my HDR. So we're going to go back to the 3 images at their raw settings. Command R opens up my Bridge. You can do this in Lightroom, by the way. People ask me all the time, why don't you do Lightroom? And I say, well, it's more of just the fact that I started doing Bridge, and then Lightroom came along, and then there was pretty much the same, it's the same engine, same behind the scenes, except Lightroom has more options, keywording and some other things, saving different versions and all that. And I just kind of like Bridge, and here I've stuck with it. I'm an old dog, it's kind of hard to teach an old dog a new trick. All right, so we're gonna go Command A, which is selecting all 3. Then I'm gonna take my Control and right click, or I can go up to, where's my little, I don't even use it anymore. Let's see if it has it. I don't even see it. I just right click it. Oh, there it is. You go and do the same thing. Hit the little 3 dot thing. And we're going to go merge to HDR. So we're going to hit that. It's going to go out there, take those 3 and analyze everything. And Adobe tells me that it actually is taking a look at a 32-bit. I don't believe it, but maybe it's true. I've talked to a number of people, get different answers, but a lot of times I talk to the gurus and I start talking about bit depth and they walk away. They're like, ugh. Because I think there's some secrets out there they don't want me to know. All right, so we're going to merge this, And we're going to call this 16-bit. We want to go back here. We're going to call this 16-bit. 16-bit. We'll call it base 2. And then it'll be saved as a DNG start off with. Okay. Now, let's go over here and apply the same settings. I think it will do that. Apply previous. No, it didn't. You know why? Because I went back to raw and I took that one and I cleared it out. So it lost that was not very good, Joel. All right, so we're going to go back and just going to do it. We're going to take it 48 Kelvin. I think I can remember this pretty well. We're going to take our highlights over our shadows. Remember I took it to 100%? Let's leave it there. Whites, we're going to do the same thing and hold down. Whoops. And pull it over until it just starts. I think we did what? 35? I can't remember what it was. Whatever. Close enough. Sorry, it's not scientific. We're going to go, we know 10% on each one of these. So 10, 10, whoops, 10. Okay, so I think that looks pretty close to what we had. Looks pretty clean. And we'll say open, and then my 32-bit will be saved the same, hopefully. So we go save as, and I encourage you to do this test yourself on one of your images. So we're going to save as the PSD, hit save. We're going to leave it open so that we can view it side by side. It's still saving over there. So now we're going to do the 32-bit way. It was the old way of doing 32-bit. It does not go through Adobe Camera Raw, ACR, but it does go through this system, and this is how you do it. All right, I have 3 images selected, same 3 images. Go up to the top and it says Tools. You pull it down to Photoshop and you go Merge to HDR Pro. You let go. And mine's going to default to where I left it last. So it's taking all 3 of those images into Photoshop and doing this magic in Photoshop and not in. If you open it for the first time, it's probably going to default to either 16 or 8-bit. So you want to scroll to 32-bit. You do not want to complete toning in Adobe Camera Raw. So that's unchecked. If you have some ghosting, you can go and click, and there was a little boat that went by, but I'm not going to worry about that. So we say OK, and it's going to go back and open it up in Photoshop and look terrible. It's going to look muddy. It's not going to look very good. Let's hit Tab. So you can see not a very attractive, and most people that do this, they go, oh, terrible, I hate 32-bit. Well, all right, so this is where the bug was in the old days, and you had to go back and do some weird things. Now, it's basically, you want to save it as a TIFF, 32-bit TIFF, and then bring it back into RAW. So let's do that. We're going to go Save As, and on my computer, I don't want that out there. Okay, so we're going to call this 32-bit test base. And we're going to save it as a TIFF. Okay? And we're going to save it back in our folder, and we say save. Now, a dialog box comes up. Very important here. Obviously, you check 32-bit. Compression, say none. You want, I've defaulted it to the interleaved, I can't pronounce that. And then Macintosh, I'm on a Macintosh. So that's, you want 32 bits, the main thing. All right, so we're going to click and say, okay. Now, maybe someone out there says, hey, Joel, you got your settings wrong. I don't know, but I know that you do 32 bits. So we're going to get out of this. There it is. All right. Okay. Now we go Command R. So In theory, I have just imported a 32-bit file. All right, so let's go over here and say apply previous. And there's my previous. Well, doesn't look very good to me. So let's take our exposure up. And there's a lot of latitude. So I know that in theory, I've got a very robust file here. So let's go about there. All the other settings are the same. And we say open. My exposure may be just a little off, but so now we're in Photoshop. So let's take a look at all three of these images. 14-bit, looking under the bridge here, we're going to blow it up in a second. 32-bit, definitely the water's changed a little bit, or that's 16-bit, and then 32-bit. I don't see a huge difference, and this is what absolutely kind of surprises me. So it tells me a lot about the, I think the 32-bit options that we have now in Photoshop that just aren't really there. I just don't think there's a big difference. So let's zoom in, and we're going to look at, let's see, 100%. Oops, I just did that, cancel. Let's hit the move tool here. Let's look at underneath the bridge here and the sky there. So let's do the same here. 100%. Probably about right there. And then this is the 14-bit. All right, so 14-bit, let's take a look at the shadows around in these steel columns here. Okay. And I brought my shadows all the way to the right on that. So here is the, what we call 16-bit, 15-bit. A little better, but I don't see a huge jump. And then 32-bit. 32-bit, the tones look smoother, but I don't have more detail. Now, if I maybe cranked my exposure over a little bit, looks like it's a little darker. The highlights look a little bit better here, but it does look smoother. I say that that's what, you know, more bit depth is supposed to give you more gradients. I do see that. We're going to go to 200% and look at this. Look at the noise difference. Let's go to the 14-bit. So I can definitely see it's noisier on the 14-bit, a little smoother on the 16-bit, and the 32-bit is smoother. But I'm a little surprised at my detail, and it could be. Let me go back to my exposure here. The exposure looks pretty close, at least on the blue background there. So I'm surprised that my shadow, pulling my shadows out, didn't give me more, but it is a smoother file, smoother gradients. The other thing that I would say is that a lot of this test may, it may be dependent on, results may depend on the image that you pick, right? So in another scenario, I may go, wow, what a big jump. Or like I said, a lot of it depends on, I think, the image, but I am a little bit surprised that there's not a bigger jump in the overall quality. And I do see, like I said, I do see a little bit smoother gradients. Let's take a look at just our sky up here in the corner. So let's go to right here, okay? And then let's take a look on, let's go down. Did I do that right? Let's see. Let's take a look. That's 50%. Okay, one more jump. 50%. Whoops, I'm moving this thing all around here. Got to hold my space down. Okay, so let's take a look. If I look at the gradient, I mean, visually on my monitor here, I don't really see, but it does seem like it's a little bit creamier. So let's take a look at our 14-bit. (14-bit), 13 or 16-bit, 32-bit. Now that 32-bit did spit it out to 16-bit. Okay, so but in theory, you're processing in 32-bit and coming back to 16-bit. Probably not going to convince you to go 32-bit. Not with this example here. So that tells me a lot. I think 16-bit, there's a little bit, a jump, but here's what I would do, and I've said this to a lot of people. When it comes to someone like me who's an educator, and I say, oh, look at the cat's meow, you got to do this. You really shouldn't take my word for it in a way, because you say, I'm going to apply because your camera's different, how you approach things might be a little different, and your end results might be a little bit, or you might come and stumble across something that, I have not seen yet. And so if you do your own test, then you go, okay, now I know how to do 32-bit. If I get in a situation where that, I might think about it. So black and white. So let's get out of here. We're not gonna save these. We're just gonna get out of here. Let's do one real quick last test, and I'm gonna show you how I test my black and whites. So let's go over to Bridge. And we have to go back to our, this is one of those high noon pictures. It's the same bridge, only earlier in that morning. So we're going to go Command R. We're going to do a 16-bit. Command A, select all. Right click, go to HDR. And we're going to process that, and I'm going to convert it to black and white. And in some ways, I think this is where you sort of see the bigger jump, is when you're really crunching things. And let me show you in a minute why I mean that. So we're going to do, we'll just say 16-bit BW, black and white. And we're going to put it back in our folder. So we're going to go up here to, it says B plus W, B and W right here. And now we're going to apply the settings like I would normally if I was going to process. Highlights down, shadows up, quite a bit there. Contrast, I'll pull the contrast down maybe a little bit. Let's look at my white point. Pull it till I start to see clip right there. Black point, same thing, right there. Let's go to the texture again. We'll just zoom around here a little bit. Okay. Now, here's where I do my test to prove to people that, in fact, the HDR is a jump. And that is when I go to my black and white mixer and I start applying my color filters. Color filters mean adjusting the blue skies, the whatever. So when I take the blue and I pull, so look, you can see it's got pure black now. But if you look at the transition here, right there where the sky starts to go down, let's zoom in. When you do a 14-bit, it gets a little it gets pretty grainy. And when you do 32 bits, a little smoother. So it's really when you start pushing the envelope to your things like going to black and white. Let's try that. Let's pull down the oranges. Let's go. There's probably not going to be any green in there. Let's do purple. Purple will also give you a little darker on the skies, not much on the magentas. But and then when you start going in here and doing like select sky, we're going to go through the whole, this masking feature in Adobe Camera Raw. It's phenomenal. And so now well, it didn't pick up the sky in between the metal lines over here. But when I start pushing the envelope with all the pixels with the tools I have within Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, then you start seeing a little bit more of the difference between a 14, 16, and 32-bit. So I'm going to say get out of there. And I want to end this. If you are just taking a shot and you say, oh, here's a scenario, oh, great shot, and an HDR would really complicate things. Don't shoot HDR. If you say, I got a beautiful scene, the wind is not blowing or whatever, so there's no movement in the trees, whatever, I'm going to do a single shot, fine. If you go, okay, I got some really bright rocks in the background, really deep foliage over here. I think I'm going to go for it. I'm going to shoot an HDR here. And then you can always just take the middle exposure and process it. Or you go, I need a little bit extra. You go back to the HDR and process it. And you go, oh, that held the highlights down and I brought the shadows out. So I think that's kind of how I think about HDR. I pretty much shoot HDR on all my landscapes and urban landscapes and just have it. Now, the last question I'm going to discuss, and I get this a lot, and there was a big discussion about this early on in HDR. How many HDRs do I do, and what are the distance and the bracketing that I do? As a general rule, if I'm in the bright scenario, like in here, I would do a 2-stop under, normal 2-stop over. If I'm in a really soft, kind of overcast day, maybe I'm up in Pacific Northwest, I would do a 1-stop on each side. If I'm in a situation like you're going to see me shoot down in Dumbo, shooting the Manhattan Bridge between buildings, is at night and there's bright lights. I think I did a 7-stop range, and to get those lights to have detail in the lights. And so in that kind of scenario, I know that I have to get a wider spread and more increments. But as a general rule, 2 stops under, normal 2 stops over will pretty much get you about everything you need with an HDR and the results. So once again, I've run into people and they say 13 stops. I'm not kidding you. Guy came at 13 stops, or whatever it was. Range. He does it all. And you have a pure white, pure black on each end. It's like, there's no detail there. So why is that frame important? I don't know. But I've had people come up to me and tell me that. I have people that will comment on my stuff and say, you're full of it, whatever. And so it's a really complicated topic. And I hope you can see at least there's 2 ways to do HDR that I know of within Photoshop. Looking at 14, 16, 32-bit gives you an idea. It's the gradients in the skies and metal and things like that I think you see the biggest difference, and retaining detail in the highlights and detail in the shadows. And so there might be an experiment that you might test out that might be a little more in depth than what I just did. But I think for a basic understanding of HDR, I think we covered that pretty good. I have on YouTube, I went through and did a huge, I say huge, but a very in-depth, for me, very in-depth sort of a little lesson on 32-bit. It's been out there for a while. It's gotten a lot of attention. Again, there's a few people that tell me I'm full of it. But so you might take a look at that. And, like I said, I could cover all that material again, but I think what we just did is enough. So with that information, we're going to go and bear with me. I'm going to do some retouching for you of some of the images. We're going to do some stitching and show you how I do my stitching. So we got a lot of stuff that's on the sort of the Photoshop side or retouching side of things to come. And we're going to see a lot more in the field of me doing stuff. So we'll continue on.